بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We are here inshallah for the next 8 sessions together where we'll be going through 8 legends, stories of our past. Some are male, some are female, some are Arabs, some are Ajam, some are Persian. And in the process of the selection of these legends, I wanted to give an array of this experience that we should have, that our history is filled with both Arabs and Ajams all equally participating in the rise of our Ummah together. So it'll be really good for some of us. Today's story comes from the people that belong to the area of Kazakhstan and that Turkmenistan and that whole Azerbaijan area and China, to some extent China and all of that area. So today's story is about a person who belongs from that particular era. But before we start off, inshallah, our series Legends Untold, I just have a random question to ask. Why do we study history? You guys can blur out the answers. If the people that are sitting at the back, it just feels like, I'm talking to a lot of people with a lot of energy at the back, like I have to reach out to them. So if they can get a little bit closer, it'll be just, it'll just become easier. You'll make the job of the angels easy to cover this gathering. Because they'll be gathering it with their wings. They really need to open their wings wide this way. So if we can get a little bit closer, I would really appreciate that. If you have to use the back for a rest, please do so. If you want to grab a chair, feel free. Just a very... So why do we study history? Yes. Why should we study Tariq? Louder. To learn humanity's past. Okay? So one of the purposes of learning Seerah could be that we want to learn the chronological order of events that took place in the past. What else could be a reason why we should learn Seerah or Tariq or history? What do you think could be a reason for us to learn Tariq? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. You gotta speak louder than that. The way you recite, that's how I need you to speak. Okay, many of the prophets came in the past. So it's good for us to know the Tariq because we get to know about their stories. But, the ulama, they have boiled down 3 primary reasons why, no matter what your age is, we should have awareness of our history. Do you know what history means? Do you know what history means? No. Okay. So history means the past, the stories of the past, the people who came at the, before you, and they did some big things, like really great things, right? So it's stories of those individuals in the past, but there are 3 primary lessons that we learn, and this you can read in the book of, Shaykh Raghib al-Sarjani. The 2 most famous historians, Muslim historians that we have alive today, Dr. Raghib al-Sarjani, and you have, oh man, I know his name, I have his books, I forgot his name. Ali Sallabi, right? Dr. Ali Sallabi. Ali Sallabi, obviously he lives in Qatar, he is from the African Jazair and al-Maghrib and Tunisia, and more importantly, Dr. Raghib Sarjani happens to be from Egypt. So he mentions in his book that there are 3 things we should be aware of when we learn history. First thing that we need to learn is it gives you context. So many times you're reading the Quran and you'll be like, oh, that's really interesting. What is this story about, right? And you'll read a particular event that takes place. For example, Surah Ahzab. You talk about an event, or you talk about Battle of Hunain. If you don't know what Battle of Hunain is, if you don't know what happened, if you don't know the number of people that were there in that battle, if you don't know what happened to the Muslims, if you don't know what happened to the mushrikeen at that time, you are not going to understand the context of that ayah, sometimes the context of the hadith, and sometimes the context of a particular ruling. Right? Why was this ruling given such? So for example, if you pick up the ruling of some of the fuqaha during the time of Andalus, one of the fatwas over there is it is absolutely okay to rip Quran apart and put it in your armpits. You're going to be like, what? What doesn't make sense? Now, context. it was said in the context that the Spanish Inquisitions were coming into Muslim people's houses. And if they were found with any form of Arabic script, they would be taken into churches and they would be tortured. So the fatwa came from the ulama that you have to protect your life, and if that happens to be that you have to rip the Quran you have and put it in your armpits while you're being investigated, it's completely fine. If we don't have the context of this fatwa, you're going to be like, what kind of fatwas these people in Andalus were given? Okay, so context, very important. Second thing that we get when we talk about story, this is something which is called maxims, right? Maxims, principles, or in Arabic if you want to call it, it's called sunan. I don't want to say sunnah, sunan, maxims. These maxims are the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates governance in this entire universe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this entire world, it's in operation, right? Imagine if you're running a small company, the amount of work you have to do, the executive, the operational, the financial, all of that, right? And the companies that succeed, they happen to have what? Standard operating procedures. Similarly, you can say sunan are like SOPs, standard operating, what is it called? SOP? Standing operating procedures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala governs this entire universe. Those are called sunan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about these sunan and He says, وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You're not going to find any alteration in the sunnah of Allah, in the maxim, in the way Allah operates this universe. You're not going to find any change in it. Well, that's really interesting. Allah says, وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا. You're also not going to find any addition, subtraction, new advancement in the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, examples of sunnah from the Quran. I just read one of the verses. إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ. When your numbers made you believe that you can win a victory, and that numbers got to your heart and you became very motivated. Oh, you know what? We're so powerful, we're going to win this battle because we're great in number. Right? Allah is like, number doesn't matter. Right? The minute we start becoming arrogant or proud of our numbers, that's where loss comes in. Now, on the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 249, He says what? He says that كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٌ كَثِيرًا. That how many times has it happened that a small group of people, they become victorious over a large group of people? بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. By the idhn of Allah. Now the word كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ means what? This is not one time, this is not two times, this is not, oh, Rasulullah won Battle of Badr, 313,000, oh, but they had Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I mean, we ain't got Rasulullah with us, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Well, but that was Abu Bakr. Well, what about, oh no, but that was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And what? But if you look at the history, you're going to find that so many times people became victorious and their numbers logically it doesn't make sense. That's why many times the people who are writing their Wikipedia pages, on Wikipedia they're writing and they're like, you know, this is a really strange matter. The number was 12,000 versus 210,000, and how Muslims won this battle is till this day a mystery. That's how because to them it's a mystery. It's like, how is it possible? How is it possible that 12,000 people went in Andalus and you had crusaders 60,000 and they had all the artillery and 12,000 Muslims that were not even trained? Andalus became Muslim at the hands of 12,000. How was it possible that when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when he took over Bayt al-Maqdis after 8 years of rules of the crusaders, 12,000 versus 60, another narration, 70,000 crusaders, fortress walls, 8 to 10 days of onslaught, and they became victorious and they opened Bayt al-Maqdis. Till this day they can't understand that. So these are called what? Sunan. And as we learn history and we learn about the legends, we'll be covering some of the sunan. We'll be covering some of these maxims that you and I can take in our lives. Number third thing that we learn is the biggest lesson that we walk away from history, right? Which is that you and I get a very strong sense of when you start reading about the Sunnah, about the history, you start recognizing where the Muslim Ummah is, at what stage is my life, at what stage is my house, at what stage is my company, at what stage is the country. And if you have understanding of that Sunan, those maxims that are governing, you can quickly tell this particular nation is on its downfall. And this is not the first time it is happening. It has happened consistently from the time of creation till the history was recorded. And this is the downfall. You can know quickly that this change is not going to last. You can know quickly when change is going to last, because you have that understanding of the history and you know that these things are repeating. That's why the Arabs, when they used to teach tariq, and many of the books of tariq, they say, "At-Tariqu yu'ayyidu nafsa." يعيد نفسه, sorry. التاريخ يعيد نفسه. That tariq is like Eid. يعيد نفسه. It's like Eid. What's one good quality of Eid? It repeats. It constantly comes back. Likewise, tariq, history, it repeats itself. Have you heard that? History, it repeats itself. That's where it comes from. So when we understand that cycle, no matter what context we apply, you will walk away with so much benefit from there. Okay, so our today's story begins. Subhanallah, I was telling Brother Fazal, I said, you know, this person that we're going to be doing his story, he is going to be very upset from me specifically, because I had to butcher his story. There was like a portion of his story was in one khutbah in one masjid, another portion was in another masjid, another portion was in it was in London, Ontario. So he's like, you know, just can you not tell my story in one sitting? Like, why are you butchering me apart like that, right? So this time around, we'll get to go through his entire story collectively from the beginning till the end. There's a lot of lessons for the younger kids, and it's nice to, you know, it's a bit scary, but again, it's a story, and I think we need to talk about these things. So this is around the 1260 AD, 658 Hijri, right? Around that time frame. I just need you to understand the scope of the world that is happening, so I'll lay the foundations. So around 1260, 658 Hijri, which famous scholar was alive at that time? 650 Hijri, 670 Hijri, when? No, that's 500. 650-ish, 7. Around that time, a very big scholar. You all know him. And? Nawawi, Imam Nawawi, right? Imam Nawawi. So he saw the fall of this dynasty and the rise of the other dynasty that we're going to talk about. And he was although we're not touching on Imam Nawawi. So this is the thing. What has happened is Salahuddin Ayyubi, the story that I told you about, 12,000 versus 70,000, Bayt al-Maqdis is conquered, and now the Ayyubi dynasty has started. And with the rise of this Ayyubi dynasty, as soon as Salahuddin Ayyubi, he passes away, you're having this scattered kingdom. So Egypt, Syria, all of these places, every little city is a kingdom of their own, and they're all scattered. They call it Tawa'if, Muluk Tawa'if, right? They were everywhere. They were just like just groups all over. And what is happening is the unity that the Ummah had is already at stake at this moment. So it is not only happening over here, it is also happening in Baghdad. Which dynasty was ruling the Baghdad at that time? Abbasi dynasty. Right, the Abbasi dynasty, Khalifa al-Musta'sim billah. He was the Khalifa of that at that time, right? Around that time. So all of this was scattered, and this is the state of the Ummah. They're not united, they're disunited, there's battles amongst them, they're fighting one another over power, over small little battles. And at this very moment, there's this great nation, great in terms of their accomplishments, not really great in terms of the values they held. This great nation, Mongols, they started their rise. So Genghis Khan, who has been building army, and he's doing smaller advances. So he's got little portions of China and stuff, but he has not made his full onslaught. He has not made his full stride forward where he's going to take over this, almost 3/4 of the world. right? So his Mongols, they eventually ended up going all the way to Cambodia down and all the way to Poland on top. That whole region they just basically took over, right? And there were only two people who stood and stopped their advances. One of them is the story that we're going to cover today. The other one I'm preparing, I don't have enough material for him. It's called his name is ad-Dīn al-Khilji. If those of you that are from India and Pakistan and stuff like that, his image has been really distorted in Bollywood movies. Especially somebody sent me a clip of some recent video of his where he's shown as this person who was, frivolous and womanizing and stuff, but that's not the case. Ad-Dīn al-Khilji was one of the only ones, other than Saif al-Qutuz, who's our story today, who actually stopped the advance of Mongols. As a matter of fact, like Alauddin al-Khilji's story, like as I'm researching, I'm like, you know what? It's like Saifuddin Qutuz would be like a very small figure compared to what he was able to do. But unfortunately, not a lot of authentic sources are available for me because not a lot of Arab historians at that time or historians of that time have written, and some of the books are in Persian, so I don't have access to that. But again, the next one that we are going to do in one of these is I do want to present that history of like the subcontinent and his accomplishments, and it'll be a very relatable story because we'll talk about it from Egypt and Syria, but we'll all talk about the same time frame, what is happening in India and Pakistan at that time. So it'll be really, inshallah, good for us. So Genghis Khan and his, it rises. And at that time, there was a massive Muslim empire called Dawla al-Khwarizmiya. Khwarizmi dynasty. Okay? Now this Khwarizmi dynasty, it goes all the way to the borders of Sindh in Pakistan. And so it starts over here. And it goes all the way to the Bahr, where you get to the ocean. Iran, Afghanistan, all of these areas are under their control. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, all these countries that were ending with an, all of them were in there. If you just type in Dawla al-Khwarizmiya, the map, you're going to see that the massive nature of their dynasty. And they were, a really powerful Muslim dynasty. Now, Mongols are advancing with Genghis Khan, and now their biggest chunk, the biggest Muslim dynasty they need to fight up against is this Dawla al-Khwarizmiya. Dawla al-Khwarizmiya at that time, the leader was Alauddin Khawarizm Shah. Alauddin Khawarizm Shah. Those of you that are interested in knowing about his life, there is a 7 series or 8 series TV show in Uzbek. Is it Uzbek language? What language is it, the Alauddin show? I can't hear what she said. Uzbek, okay, yeah. So it's an Uzbek language show. And you can find it on, I believe, Usman Online. It is translated, it's dubbed. So Alauddin Khawarizm Shah, this person that we're talking about, they have a whole 7 to 8 episode show on him. Right, so go and read that or watch it if you can, so you'll get a lot of context of what we're talking about and you'll fill that story in. So it's a really good show, right? It talks about Alauddin rising, it talks about Genghis Khan, it talks about the father not really taking decisive action, Alauddin saying, no, this is a person, we need to defend our lands, we're Muslims, we're not going to back down. He's like, no, let's do diplomacy. His father's like, let's do diplomacy. Like he's a ruler of this giant state. And Alauddin was like, no, there's no diplomacy with Genghis Khan. Like we gotta do it the way he does it, right? So, long story short, what ends up happening is, in the army of Alauddin, there is a person by the name of Mamdud. There's a person by the name of Mamdud. Mamdud is an army general, and he is also aligning with the thought of Alauddin Khawarizm Shah. He's aligning with this thought that we need to defend and we need to go and get them at the borderlands, not wait in our palaces for them to invade our country. Now Mamdud, right when he's about to leave on this journey, on the first defense battle, he has a small baby boy that is born. His name was Mahmud. Anybody named Mahmud over here? Anyone named Mahmud? Usually there is. You're Mahmud? No? Okay. So his name was Mahmud. Mahmud was around 6 months when the Mongols started their first attack on the Dawla, the Khawarizmi dynasty. He was around 6 months. Now, long story short, what ends up happening is the Muslims, this is not a story about the fall of the dynasty of Dawla al-Khawarizmiya, but bottom line, they lose the battle. And 7 years of defense comes down to a battle in the palace of Ala ad-Dīn Khwarizm Shah. The Mongols, they enter the palace. They kill every single person, every single object that had ruh was killed. Every single thing. Chickens, goats, cows, dogs, nothing was left alive. And not only that, when they would kill, and I mean, there's some kids here, so I'm just going to be like, PG. They would kill and they would do things to the corpses that you cannot even imagine, right? From burning to all other things, right? And just use your imagination. Anything worst possible, chopping, everything possible, right? So it was horrible. There was this one 7-year-old. Anybody 7-year-old? That's what I said. 7 years old? 7 years old? I like the sister raise her hand. I'm 7. 7? Are you 7? Anyone 7 years? Who's 7 years old here? I see some people that are 7. How old are you? 8. Okay. Oh, cheeky 8. Yeah, I'm 8. I'm not 7. I passed that 10 years ago. 7? Okay. So 7 years of age, this person by the name of Mahmud, the son of Mamdud, he sees his entire family that was taken away from him, right? Just I'm using words so that you imagine. They were taken away from him by the Mongols, and they were all, didn't survive. And more importantly, when they come to get Mahmud, he picks up a sword at age 7, and the first soldier that comes, he kills him. Then they send another soldier, he kills him too. Then they send another soldier, he kills him too. So the Mongols, they're like so fascinated with this person. They're like, you know what? This is such a cool kid. We can't kill him. We're going to take him for some target practice. We're going to take him to our camp back. And you know what? We'll let our soldiers argue with him, fight with him and stuff. And you know what? If he dies, he dies. Right? So they took him. So he went from being a prince in a palace. Right? Mamdud was the cousin of Ala ad-Dīn. So he was a prince. He was from a royal family. He went from being a prince to a prisoner, right? He went from prisoner. Now for the next 2 to 3 years, his entire life was defending himself. When they would give him food, they would fix him up, and then when he would be full energy, they would put him in the ring, and they would have men that would fight with him. Now what started happening is this was meant for a practice, but he started getting good at fighting. Because he had that resolve that he's not going to let anybody die. Like, he was determined that he's not going to die. And his mental resilience was powerful for a 7-year-old boy, and then 9 and 10. Now what happens is around 10, anybody 10 years old here? Raise your hands if you're 10. What is it? Don't 10, 7s? What's going on? The story was supposed to... You're 10? Okay, Jazakallah khair. 2 zeros, okay. MashaAllah. So at 10 years of age, anybody 9? If you're 9, raise your hands. Okay, MashaAllah, 9. Stand up. 9, stand up. Right? You're 9 too? Good. So 9, 10, right? Around that same age, if you think about it, right? 9, 10. 11? Anyone 11? 11? 11? Stand up. Yeah, so 9, 10, 11, so pretty decent. Like, that sister, like, she can put up a good fight. Right? Like 11 years old, if she had to defend herself, she can put up a good fight. So, he's 10, 11, we don't know what was his height. He starts putting up, he becomes stronger and stronger. And what is happening is something really interesting. The soldiers, when they're fighting him, especially the ones in the ring, because of the expressions that he shows them, that facial expressions, that he's angry and he's not going to let anybody kill him, they're terrified of him. They're scared of this kid. So much so that many of these soldiers, when they would go to sleep, it is mentioned that they would see nightmares of this kid killing them. And what would happen is they would be like, in the middle of the night, they would get up screaming the word Qutuz, 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 which means like a wild beast. Right? So in the middle of the night, they would be scared of this person. Now, fascinatingly enough, the general, he's like, you know what, this kid is killing the morale of our army. We need to get rid of him. This is not good for us. This is too powerful Muslim, So I'll pause over here and talk about something really, a lesson for us, right? Life, we don't know what's going to happen to us. We can be struck with any difficulty. Anything can happen to us. Look at all the kids who are 11, 10, 12, living in Yemen, living in Somalia, living in all those. Those are kids that are living in this world. All of you that are 7, 8, 9, 10, there are kids out there that are living 7, 8, 9. But what happens when you meet that kid? Like I met a Syrian refugee girl. SubhanAllah, I met her and she was 12. But if you talk to her, she was 40. Right? Because life sometimes has its ways, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that what was best for that person and what is best for you and what is best for him. So ad-Dīn al-Qutuz, the lesson for us is no matter what happened, he didn't give up. And this is a message for older people. Like you have lesson for all of us from a 9, 10, 11-year-old boy. Alone, a single Muslim, in an army of Mongols who are barbarians, who don't have any discipline. And he's still holding on to his faith. So the lesson number one for us as parents is you can protect your children all you want. But if Allah decides to protect your child, then that's the ultimate protection you need. Right? A parent came to me the other day and he's like, my husband, he was driving the car and we were in a mall and then we saw our son hanging out with this girl. We're thinking of taking him out of school. I'm like, what? That's not the solution. Right? That's not the solution. You can have a conversation, you can whatever, that's not the solution. The solution is you need to rely on Allah's protection and then use all the means possible, right? Talk to him, maybe change his school and all of that. Look at what he's watching, environment. But if Allah decides to protect, there's nothing you can do about it. Nobody will be able to touch your children. And recently I came across this inspirational, powerful story of a 14-year-old convert child, teenager, 14-year-olds, convert, who works night shifts so that he can go to an Islamic school and pay for his own schooling because his parents refuse to pay for Islamic school. And he says, as long as until I'm an adult, I'm still bound to my parents. He's respectful to his parents, but he's working nights and then he goes and he's working with his uncle who's like, on the side kind of deal, like, I'll pay you this much, how much do you need? 600, all right, you'll come and do and stock shelves in the middle of the night for me in my store and off you go. I'll give you 600. But when I met him, I was in tears. So I told the principal of that school, I said, why doesn't somebody in the community cover this kid's cost? Like we owe it to him, right? And he's like, we've tried. He says, I'm not going to take a single penny from anybody. This is my Islam. I found it. I will protect it. So 14-year-old child. In this country, in Canada, during pandemic, Allah is capable of protecting our children. So if we rely on His protection, and what is in your hands is strengthening your connection with Allah. What is in my hand is strengthening my connection. So when I make that dua to Allah, that Allah keep my child safe, Allah listens to that dua. What your child does, what your teen does outside, do you have any control over it? You don't. So let's not be concerned too much about it. Focus on what is in our control and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And in his story, you're going to see that how Allah protects. Then Saifuddin Qutuz is sold into a market in Syria. The story goes on that he is there, and there's a person who takes him, and this is a person who actually would go to slave markets back in the day. Children that were found in wars, young children, young girls, women. If they were caught as prisoners, people would, there would be markets and they would sell them off. And this, although slavery is not there, but this is what used to happen at that time. So he is sold into slavery in Syria. Now, what language do you think he's speaking? Some form of a dialect of a Kazakhstan, Persian, Afghani, Farsi, that type of a language, right? Because of his last name, Khawarizm Shah, right? So you know that his language was influenced by a Persian influence of a language. So when he comes to Syria, what language do they speak in Syria? Arabic. So he had to quickly get with the program. What language did the Mongols speak? They had their own language, right? So he had to quickly get with the program of understanding what the Mongols are saying about him within the 2-3 years he was in their camps. And then he goes to this new land, Syria. Imagine your child going to a completely new land where they don't even understand the language, and now they need to protect their iman, and they'll have absolutely no control and autonomy over what they control. Odds are all stacked against this young kid. So he comes over there, and fascinatingly enough, what happens is he is sold, but the person who buys him is a person who goes to these markets and he buys these young kids and he sends them to madaris, he sends them to madrasas. And there was a madrasa at that time that was run, I don't remember the name of the person who had a waqf for that, but he had all of these schools, and what they would do is they would go to these markets where these young kids were, doesn't matter where they were, as long as they were kids, they would take them out of these markets and they would send them to these schools. These schools would educate these kids would come up learning Quran, knowledge, tafsir, hadith, then they would even teach them how to defend themselves, modern day self-defense, and many of them, if they had interest, then they could actually go and learn how to be a soldier and then register themselves in some form of a royal force for any of these kings. So there was a high demand for these private armies at that time, and most of these private armies were the Mamalik. That's where the word Mamalik comes from, the army of the slaves, because they were all slaves, and then the master would sell them to another person, but again that master would take care of this child. One of the very interesting stories that happened with Saifuddin al-Qutuz when he was in Syria is that the first week that he's in Syria, one of the persons had lived in his lands and he spoke the language. So he told him, he said, you know what, eat your food, otherwise it's not going to be good for you. And this Muslim at that time obviously didn't treat that young boy at that time he was pretty mean to him. And he said some really, really mean words like your mom is this, your dad is this, and really bad stuff. So Saifuddin al-Qutuz, he became so upset that he didn't eat any food for that entire day. And he kept crying the entire night. So one of the brothers at that time, one of the brothers to this person who said this, he realized that he heard somebody crying, so he goes into the room and he finds Saifuddin al-Qutuz who's crying over there. So he says, "Ma laka ya bunay, what's wrong with you? Why are you crying?" So at this point, Saifuddin al-Qutuz, he says that I'm not crying because that person, he hit me. I'm crying because he said things about my parents that are not true. My parents are Muslim and they are from this family and this family and this. And when they told him, when he told who his parents were and whose uncle is ad-Dīn Khawarizm Shah, the guy was like, okay, time for you to go from our house. Like you're going to be trouble, because now that whole dynasty and you're like from the royal family, the core of the family, they're going to come after us. So he goes back running to his other brother. He's like, listen, we need to get rid of this kid, like ASAP. He can't be in this madrasa. He cannot be in this madrasa, right? And so they went back to the slave market, and some other person who was also scouting for younger kids, he bought him for a different king at that time that they were preparing the army for them. And we're going to come to that particular person's name, later down the road. So again, he went to a different madrasa at that time, and now he is fully established. And then Saifuddin al-Qutuz, around the age of 24, 25, he sees a beautiful dream. And he sees in his dream that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he comes to him. And he says to him, what are you doing in Syria? You were meant to be the one who leads the Ummah from Egypt. A slave went from being a prince to a prisoner to a slave, no control over his life. He is ready to participate in an army, and he sees this dream. So he's like, you know what, it's okay. He sees the dream again. And the third time he goes to a very famous scholar alive in his area at that time, Izz ibn Abd Salam, very famous scholar of our history. He was called Sultan al-Ulama. He was called the king of the scholars, Sultan of Ulama. Izz ibn Abd Salam, he says, let me go and talk to your master. And they have their little conversation, and the master is like, you know what? I will let you go. I will let you go. And I will free you, and you can go back, and you can go and participate and become the king itself, become a soldier at somebody's army in Egypt. I have no problem with that, but I only have one condition. And it's like, what is your condition? It's like, the only condition I have is that if you see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam again, send my salam to him. That's my price for you. If you see him again, just say, I said salam. That's it. And I'll let you go. So next what happens is Saifuddin al-Qutuz, he somehow miraculously, now went from being in some area near close to Iran, from there ended up in Mongol camps in China, then he comes back to Syria, and from Syria he is in Egypt now. And this is where the story of Saifuddin al-Qutuz becomes really interesting. Now, while the story of Saifuddin al-Qutuz is taking place, the Mongols are not sitting quietly. They are in full force. So the Mongols around the same time have advanced, and they have already destroyed Dawla al-Khwarizmiya, they have destroyed other countries, they are having their battle with ad-Dīn al-Khilji in India, they have lost to him, and now they said, we can't go India, let's go this way. Let's go westwards. Right? We can't go down south, let's go westwards. So what comes west if they're coming from Mongol and they cannot go to India? Iraq, Baghdad. Right? So they can't go down, so let's go to Baghdad instead. So now their first attack is Baghdad. They arrive in Baghdad, and the fall of Baghdad is a story that is of its own really, painful. But just a few highlights. So the Mongols, they enter Baghdad, and in the war or this conquest of Baghdad for them, it took 40 days for Baghdad to fully surrender to the grasp of Mongols. And at that time, according to the least estimates, according to the historians' least figures, Wikipedia shows a lot bigger figure, but let's go with the least figure. What do you think was the casualties of that battle? Those of you that have heard my khutbah, don't say it. Some of you have heard my khutbah, you can't say the figure. Well, how many people do you think were killed in Baghdad at the hands of Mongols? Yes. Did you hear my khutbah? Okay. 150,000? No, more. 500,000? No, more. Somebody else on this side. No, you know the number. You can't say it. Yeah, you know the number. You can't say it too. I know the ones who know the number. Give me a number. Come on, it's not that hard. Give me a number. It's not 500,000, it's more. So what is it next? Just a little bit shy of 1 million. Okay, just a little bit. Yes. So it's actually 850 to 900,000, roughly. Between 800 to 900,000. The higher estimates, it's close to 2 million. Okay? So just imagine for 1 second, in 40 days, entire city of Mississauga, gone. The people of city, what do you think is going to happen on the streets? Blood. Now, obviously, Mississauga has good drainage systems, but at that time, they didn't have drainage systems. So it is mentioned that blood was the rivers, because of the number of people that literally they have stories mentioned where a Mongol would capture 40 Muslims and he would take them by a river bank, and he would want to just take care of them, and he would say, oh, wait a minute, my sword is not ready, let me go and sharpen my sword. And out of the fear of the Mongols, those Muslims would not move from their place. Complete surrender to the Mongols. And 800,000 to 1.5 to 2 million people were killed at that time. The entire Maktaba of Baghdad, the greatest library alive at that time, in presence at that time, greatest library, was completely ransacked by the Mongols. They took all the books and they put them in Furat. They actually built a bridge over it. So because of the books, they were able to create, like a sand, how they did it in Dubai, they built those islands from the bottom, right? They actually dumped so many books in the river that they were able to then, solidify that and build a bridge over so their horses would cross the river, right? It says, وَبَنُوا عَلَيْهِ الْجِسْرِ, that they were able to build using the books, the amount of books they had. Because those books were written by ink, the color of the river changed, because as that ink was running off the papers, you could see the color turn into blue and black of the river. And then Mongols, they said, our next target is where? Our next target is Syria, upwards, Sham. So they crossed Jordan, and now they are in the next dynasty at that time, which was a secondary dynasty of Ayyub dynasty, run by a small king at that time. Dimashq completely surrenders. They didn't put up a fight. Then Idlib, they don't put up a fight. Then they go to another place called Hama. They put up a very strong fight, another 100,000 people are killed over there. And then Sayfuddin al-Qutuz, while this just happened, on the other hand, Sayfuddin al-Qutuz, within 2 years of him being in Egypt, as a slave in an army, now he has risen the ranks of being an advisor, a major advisor to ad-Dīn Aybak at that time, who was the Khalifa, who was the ruler of Egypt at that time. Right? So he ends up becoming the main advisor. Now this person had another son by the name of Ali. Long story short, he was killed, not Ali, the ruler at that time of Egypt, he was killed by his wife, Shajarat Dur. That was the name of the wife. Shajarat Dur killed her own husband. And then Sayfuddin al-Qutuz goes and arrests her, sends her to a prison, and she was executed in the prison. And now this young boy, 15-year-old, becomes a proxy leader. He is the front face, but Sayfuddin al-Qutuz is at the back. Sayfuddin al-Qutuz is at back, and he is leading the entire country of Egypt. And then, as he is still establishing himself, he hears about what happened, and he hears that Mongols are going to go straight to, what's the next step after, if they've taken Lebanon, Syria, what's next? What's the most sacred thing for Muslims there? Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis. So they're going to take Bayt al-Maqdis. At that point, Sayfuddin Qutuz, he says, we cannot have a 15-year-old boy running the country in such situations, and we are the last dynasty left. All Muslim kings and kingdoms have fallen at the hands of Mongols. So at that moment, he receives a letter. When Sayfuddin al-Qutuz, he assumes power, removes the 15-year-old Khalifa, becomes powerful, a letter comes from Hulaku Khan. Genghis Khan has died. Genghis Khan had 2 grandsons, Hulaku and Kublai Khan. Kublai was more towards the feminine type of a man. He was not very, he could definitely fight like compared to today. He was feminine for that standard, those days standards, not today's standards. He would be really masculine for today's standards. But, he was not like the real, what Genghis Khan was looking for, right? And so when Hulaku Khan took over power, Hulaku Khan sent this following message, and I need you to read it. This is in English. And it says, from the king of the kings of the east and the west, the great Khan, to the Qutuz Mamluk, the one who fled our swords. Referring to the fact that when we conquered your dynasty, we took you, then you ran, you were in our camps, and we sold you, and you were saved by our swords. You should think of what happened to other countries and submit to us. You have heard how we have conquered vast empires and have purified the earth with disorder. We have conquered vast areas, massacring all people in it. You cannot escape the terror of our armies. Where can you flee? What road will you use to escape? Or our horses are swift, our arrows are sharp, our swords are like thunderbolts, our hearts are hard as mountains. Our soldiers are as numerous as the sand. Fortresses will not detain us, armies will not stop us. Your prayers to God will not avail against us. We are not moved by the tears nor touched. Only those who beg our protection will be safe. Hasten your reply before fire of war is kindled. You are the only nation that stands that we need to march against at present. Sayfuddin al-Qutuz, he hears this, and he has 4 messengers that came and they delivered this message to him. Okay? Now, he has a council that is sitting, and he says, what do you think we do? What do we need to do now? This is an open war. Like, listen, if you don't do this, it's an open war. It's happening. So at that point, there was somebody else in the council. There was somebody else in the council by the name of Baybaris. Now, 2 of these names, Sayfuddin al-Qutuz and Baybaris, are extremely important for us to learn this era. They were basically friends, and they were both slaves. Now, Bible says, listen, I'm of the opinion that we show these people how to respect Muslims. I mean, he's talking about, like, we're Muslims. We're not afraid of anything. So we give them a proper treatment, which is that we take care of them. They shouldn't live. They should be taken care of, and we should send a very strong message to Hulaku, because if we surrender, if we send a soft message, then that is going to be a signal to them that we're weak and we're afraid. And this is an open attack on our lands. This is not diplomacy. He's already saying surrender, or we're going to come and attack. So he basically takes care of these people. Rather, the bodies of these individuals are hung in strategic locations within the city to create this awareness that we're not afraid of this. Everybody should know this. And then he responded to him. That's a long response. Some days I think, what we should do should be a series. It's called like SMSs from history. And it should be the message from this guy and what he responded and stuff. That would be just so fascinating to just different big figures from our past and their correspondences between one another. Like that itself would be a really good series to look at, because you'll capture what is happening there. So he says over here, min a'jab al-ajab tahdid al-luyuth bil-rutut. Wow. He says, this is really astonishing and strange. You are trying to seduce a lion with a strawberry. Imagine, who does that? You're talking about Hulaku Khan. Think of the most powerful nation, right? And then a small Muslim nation sending a letter like that to that nation. They're like, oh, you know what? We're going to put sanctions on you and all of this. He's like, you know what? You're trying to seduce a lion with strawberries. And you're trying to, وَالسِّبَاعْ بِالضِّبَاعْ, and you're trying to seduce predators with vegetables. Like predators don't eat vegetables. And he says, and you're trying to seduce al-kamata bil-kara'. You're trying to, we eat so the kama is basically the thigh, the leg of the goat. Like really meaty portion of the goat. We are that meat. And now you're telling us that you're seducing us for a dinner, and in that dinner you're going to offer us kira', which is basically the feet of the goat. Like genuinely you want us to come and attend that feast of yours, which is nothing but like feet of a goat. If he was a Desi, he would never say that, because pies are really delicate in a Desi culture. Pie bahut maze ke hote hain, right? So he would, But anyhow, then he says, خُيُولُنَا بَرْقِيَّةً, our horses are like lightning. سِهَامُنَا يَمَنِيَّةً, our arrows are made in Yemen. The best arrows in the world are made in Yemen. سُيُوفُنَا مُضَرِيَّةً, our suyuf are made in Mudar, from the tribe of Banu Mudar, the best suyuf. As a matter of fact, one of the descriptions, we were doing this book with my kids, Shama'il, and it is mentioned that, somebody asks, that was the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam like the Saif of Mudar? Was the face of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam like a sword? And I was like, well, what kind of question is that? Like, why would somebody ask that? So the commentator explains, he says, what this means is, was his face like this, like a sword, or was it a round face? And the reason the word Saif was used like a sword, because sword has shine, so it had nur. So the person responded, no, his face was not like a sword, al-Mudari, rather his face was like the full moon. It was round and filled with light. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? So that Saif is this sword it is referring to. Then he says, فُرْسَانُنَا لُيُوثٌ إِذَا رَكِبَتْ, our knights, when they ride their horses, they become like lions. وَأَفْرَاسُنَا لَوَاحِقٌ إِذَا طَلَبَ, that our knights, when they chase you, there's no running away from you. Then he says that for us, جُلُودُنَا دُرُوعُنَا, our skins are our shields. We don't carry shields. We're actually not afraid to die. Our skins are our shields. And he says, for us, you cannot make us afraid of anything. وَجَمْعُنَا لَا يُرَاعُ بِالتَّهْدِيدِ, and you can send all your warnings. We are not afraid of warnings. And then this is the part that I need you to all walk away with. He says, it's a long message. I'm just, skimming through. He says, إِنْ عَصَيْنَاكُمْ فَتِلْكَ الطَّاعَةِ. If we disobey this message of yours, in our deen, that is obedience. وَإِنْ قَتَلْنَاكُمْ. And if we were to fight you and we win, فَنِعْمَ الْبِضَاعَةِ. How great of a victory that we're going to walk away with, and a lot of booty. وَإِنْ قُتِلْنَا. And if we are killed in the battle against you, i.e. we lose the battle, فَبَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ سَاعَةً. Between us and Jannah is only an hour. And that was the response he gave. Now, the battle took place on September 3rd, and really powerful at that time, 1260. This was called the Battle of Ain Jalut. The purpose of this story is not to go into the Battle of Ain Jalut. Those of you that would like to read about the Battle of Ain Jalut, it's a really good story. You can actually read it on Wikipedia. They've done a great job for once. Like so many times there's always one-sided. But in this time, because they don't want to, it was the Mongols and the Muslims, so they're like, let's choose the Muslims. Let's take the side of the Muslims this time. So the story is well written. If you speak Arabic, then it's even better written in the Arabic Wikipedia page. It's really sad that there's at least I would say, roughly 60% of the information is missing in the English page, which is available on the Arabic page. But if you're able to do that, go and read the story of Ain Jalut. I'm only going to present a few glimpses of that battle for all of us to walk away with, and then a few lessons, and we'll stop. What time is Salah? 8:45. Okay, so if we stop by 8:35, we're good? Okay, are you guys okay if we stop by 8:35? Everyone's okay? Okay, good. So some of the scenes that happened in the battle is something really fascinating. So this is the first time that a Muslim army actually used trumpets and drums, and I don't know what that music instrument is when you hold those two plates and you hit. I don't know whatever that's called. I don't study music, so I don't know. What is it called? Percussion. No, percussion is this. But those two discs, and you hit them like, the brass discs, and what are they called? I can't hear. Cymbals? Cymbals? Okay, we'll call it cymbals. Okay? You have more knowledge than me on this. Symbols, we call them symbols. So 3 things. And what they did is, how you create anthems, right? Every country knows their anthem. There's a certain beat to that anthem, right? They created anthems for separate battalions. So they're like, we ain't got iPhones or smartwatches to communicate with another. It's like, hey man, now your turn to attack. Your turn to hit the arrows. No, we don't know. How are we going to give signals to one another? And this is a massive battle that is taking place between 12,000 Muslims, and in one account 30,000 Mongols, and another account 60,000 Mongols. I mean, this is a big battle. So if we are going to be having this battle, we need to have ways of communication. The first time Muslims actually created the strategic sounds and these were musicians that were brought in, and they're like, your job is to create a tune. And when you play this tune of a drum and a trumpet and cymbals, a particular army would only come up and attack. So this way it was very easy for Saifuddin al-Qutuz in the battlefield to say, I want the green army. And then the musician, the orchestra at that time, he knew that, okay, this is the beat I need to play. And then it was a valley, so the battle took place in the valley of Ain Jalut, so the sound would travel. And they were able to attack. Now, second thing the Muslims did is, it was a first for the Muslim armies at that time, at least what is recorded, Allahu Alam if it was first or not, was colors. So what they did is, in order to create an impression of the unity of the Ummah at that time, although the Ummah was disunited, but he was able to gather a really good army of 12,000. What he did is, any army that came from a specific location, so if the army came from Syria, he said, you guys are going to wear green armor. If you're coming from this place, you're going to wear red. If you're coming from this place, you're going to wear black. So they color-coded. And Saifuddin, while he was preparing for the attack, he was able to infiltrate one of his spies, who became a really good counsel to the general at that time by the name of Katabgha. His name was Katabgha. So he became really, really influential. And in the battlefield, this infiltrator who was there, he would tell Katabgha, he's like, oh man, this is the army of Syria. I mean, like, you have no idea what these people are. And he was like, whoa, Syria is here in the battle too? It's like, yeah, that's just a small portion of that army. And then they would bring the Orange Army. And he's like, oh, these are the vicious fighters of Iran. Like, what? They're here too. So he basically, before even the battle took place, you know, have you seen that New Zealand, the people in New Zealand, they have this dance that, you know, the display of power they do? What is it called? Haka. Haka, right? Haka, right? Haka. They go like, and then they make, like, watch it up. Like, it's weird. Like, it's all these men and they're making these animal faces and stuff. Like, for me, that's what I've visualized, right? You know, Saifuddin al-Qutuz doing these Haka things with this, like, you know, these Mongols, because he knew that they are like these type of people, and we gotta win the battle before it even begins. So this person who's the infiltrator, he rather later mentions that before even the battle began, Katabgha had already lost. Because he said there is no way in his, because there's no way, they didn't have drone shots, like let's send a drone and see how big the army is. They didn't have that. They're just, whatever was information was fed to him, he's basing it on that. So bottom line, they used colors, and that became the first time ever that the Muslim army was able to outsmart their enemies despite their number. So sometimes battle is not about just warfare, it's about being tactical, it's about thinking about that. Second thing that happened is a beautiful story, and I'll end with this, was the story of the death of the wife of Saifuddin al-Qutuz in the battlefield. So he hears that his tent has been attacked by Mongols in the Battle of Ain Jalut, and he hears that, you know, his wife has been affected by that. So he gets really, really afraid, and he's like, oh, I need to go and protect my wife. So he leaves everything and he runs. When he goes, he finds his wife in last breath. So he sees his wife and he says, Wa habibata, oh my loved one, like what have they done to you? So even her, when she's dying in her last breath, she says to him, she says to Saifuddin al-Qutuz, she says, La taqul wa habibata, don't say, oh my beloved, rather say, wa islama. Say, oh, unto Islam, i.e. that if you don't defend Islam today, there will be no Islam left. And she passes away. So that statement of his wife, wa Islama, became such a motivating factor for Saifuddin al-Qutuz that he started fighting on the battlefield on foot. And when a person came and saw him, he said, you are the Khalifa, you are the leader. If you are lost, people will be lost. You need to get a horse and go back. He says, listen to his response, and this is something you walk away with today. He says, as for me, if I am killed, then I go and meet my Habib in Jannah. I meet my wife in Jannah. But as for Islam, if I'm killed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to protect Islam. It was there before I came, and it will be there after I go. And he did not take that horse. And he carried on fighting until, you know, the Battle of Ain Jalut, you know, every single Mongol that marched in the battle and they came to Bayt al-Maqdis, every single one of them was killed. Not a single one of them survived that battle. And if you go to Wikipedia, it says casualties, entire army. It says that even there, entire army. In Encyclopedia Britannica, casualties, entire army. Like there was nobody left. Saifuddin is like, I ain't leaving any one of you guys. Like you have done enough fasad in this world. Now, this is the story. The story ends here, but three main lessons for us. And the purpose of these stories is that we walk away with lessons. Number one, life is going to have ups and downs. You're going to have moments when he became a prince. You're going to have moments when he became a prisoner. You're going to have moments when he became a slave. You're going to have moments when he became the king. You're going to have moments when Saifuddin al-Qutuz sadly was assassinated by his own army. And his story is so powerful for us because it has all the stages of a person's life. Number two, time does not determine the amount or the strength of your victory. Because he only lasted for 8 to 9 months, his rule. When he became the Khalifa, when he took power, he only ruled he only ruled Egypt for 9 months. Within the 9 months of rule, he was able to unite more than half of the Muslim Ummah. In 9 months. As a person ruling a land where he's not native Arab in Egypt, not speaking their main language, speaking with an accent. All the things are stacked up against it, looking like a Mongolian. Everything stacked against him. Visible minority, all these words that we use today. But he didn't let that get to him. Slave, all doors closed for you. You're a slave, you can't even own property. And he ended up becoming a powerful leader and documented his name in history. Although he ruled for 9 months, he is recorded till this day, and he's been given by many of the scholars the title that he is the one who actually saved. He was the savior of Islam. Because today many of those countries, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Iran, all those countries are Muslim today because he was able to stop the advance of the Mongols at that time. Last lesson for every single one of us, that if Allah chooses to protect, then there is nothing you and I can do. And if Allah chooses not to protect, what happened in Baghdad, then there is nothing you and I can do. Even if we reach at that pinnacle of the peak power, Baghdad was the pinnacle of Islam at that time. Armies, education, intellectual, every single thing. And they were on morality. They were not that immorals. They were on morality. Despite that, Allah chose to show us that victory, rise and fall does not determine your end. Those are basically all but maxims in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's life, that Allah brings a Muslim nation in power, removes them from power, brings a non-Muslim in power, removes them from power, brings Muslim. This is the standard operating procedure of how this universe operates. Today you're in power, tomorrow somebody else is in power. What is important for you and me to walk away with is how much effort and power do we put in our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the whole point of these stories, inshallah.